I am very, very pleased to introduce Dr. Susann Görlinger. She's working at ETH Zurich since 2010. She's co-leading the mobility platform and also leading the ETH Zurich airplane project. Just as information, I'm going to display the slide for Susann for technical reason. So thank you for your understanding. And now, Susann, the screen is yours.
Many thanks, Eloise, for the introduction and for the opportunity to present our flight reduction project. Next slide, please. Next, please. The presentation has three parts. One part is about international flights and flight reduction in general. The second part is about the flight reduction project at ETH Zurich. And one slide at the end is about the lessons learned. Next slide, please. This slide shows the international air travel and illustrates why we should reduce the flights. As you can see, the passenger numbers have increased exponentially between 1970 and 2019. And this is certainly not in line with the Paris Agreement and goes the wrong way. Next slide, please. So why is the reduction of flights relevant for universities? And I would like to stress it's not just for universities, but I want to talk about universities here. First of all, scientists fly a lot more than the average person. This is a study by Burian from 2018. The second reason is that few academic flyers are responsible for most emissions. And this is an interesting study by Wines and Donner from 2018. They looked at 1,500 individuals across 8 departments from the University of British Columbia, and they found out that about a third of them did not fly at all. 80% of the emissions are caused by 25% of flyers only, and even more so, 50% emissions are caused by 8% of flyers. And you can see that in the graph on the right-hand side of the slide. And the emissions, you can see that 1,000 people or individuals which are flying, and they are sorted by how much they fly. So on the left-hand side, you see the people who fly very little, and on the right-hand side, you see the high flyers. And you can see this is a very unequal distribution. And this doesn't only account for universities. I talked to some large organizations like large pharma industry and so on, and they say for them it's very similar. Next slide, please. The third reason is if we are leading by example, we can start setting a trend. And this is a study by Westlake, and he said that leading by example by giving up flying appears to send a powerful and effective message. The fourth reason is credibility, and this is a study by Attari, and he found that the public finds scientists who fly less more credible. This is the walk the talk argument. And it certainly applies to ETH Zurich because we do have a very strong environmental science department. And the fifth reason is a study I like best at the moment. It's a study by Wines from last year. And they looked at the influence of high flyers and professional success. And they found that academic air travel and the frequency of it has very limited influence on professional success. And this is an interesting study because this was the most frequent used argument I heard, that if we want to keep our excellence, we do have to fly. And again, this doesn't only apply to universities. The same arguments I heard from large business. Next slide, please. So why is air travel, now I come to the part of ETH Zurich, why is it relevant for us? First of all, more than half of our total CO2 emissions are from business travel, and 93% of those are from flights, and it's mainly long-distance overseas flights. We know that the total emissions have increased since 2006, as you can see in this graph, but the emissions per FTE remained nearly constant, so it's due to the growth of ETH Zurich. And we introduced a new monitoring system, which is based on flight number, class, and date. The graph itself, we have used 3 different methods. From 2006 to 2015, we used a method based on cost factor calculation. In 2016 to 2019, you have 3 graphs for 1 year. And this is due to the fact that in 2016, we had the method by one company calculated. Then we changed the company. So we had the 2006 and 7i. This is the company who also implemented our new monitoring system. And the 16 to 19 graph, you can see here without any number behind it. Sorry, without an E or an I behind it. This is our new calculation method based on the flight number, class, and date, so which gives us a very exact emissions. And in these, we also included student flights, which you can see in light blue. Next slide, please. Talking about the emissions from student flights, you can see here, these are the total emissions between 2016 and 2019. And we only consider flights if they are part of the curriculum. The annual emissions between 16 and 19, they varied between 1,500 and 2,000 tons of CO2 equivalents. And we know that student flights account for around 10% of ETH flights. The reason why, when we set up the project, we included student flights was that we had the impression that student flights had also increased. So we did a preliminary study where we looked at the figures from 2006 and 2015. They're not depicted here. But in that, we saw that student flights emission had doubled over those 9 years. So this was for us one of the reasons why we thought this is nothing to ignore. Next slide, please. If we look at the emissions of student flights by distance categories, we see that most emissions were also due to long distance flight, which is the same as for staff flights. So you can see on this graph different distance categories between 0 to 499, and most emissions are above 1,750 kilometers, which are the long distance flights. And we know that excursions are the main reasons for student flights. Next slide, please. Now, what did we do at ETH Zurich to tackle the problem? In 2016 and 2017, we had several student initiatives to reduce air travel emissions. Around the same time, so in spring 2016, the Vice President for Infrastructure, he initiated the mobility platform, and one of the thematic focus was on flight reduction. When I looked at the flight emissions I just showed you in 2016, and I looked at the history back, I realized that despite several efforts, like sensitization efforts, workshops, there was a top-down decision in 2006 by the governing board to reduce flight emissions by 50% within a few years. And as you could see from the figures, none of those worked. And I thought we are lacking a really systematic approach to tackle a problem at a university like ETH. So in 2016, I commissioned a concept how to reduce air travel at ETH Zurich. And this concept, with that concept, we went into the governing board. And in 2017, April 2017, so pretty much exactly 3 years ago, we had this top-down decision by the executive board with a bottom-up implementation by the departments where they had to define a reduction goal with the respective measures. And the bottom-up approach was rather longish, so it took really 2017 and 2018 for the departments, the governing board, and the administrative units to define a reduction target. And they were completely free how big this target was. Finally, we had this target, and on average, over all of ETH, this was 11%. This is without compensation, and we deduct the efficiency gain of the airline. So if you wouldn't deduct the efficiency gains, the target over those 2019 to 2025 would be around 22%. We implemented the project in 2019, and we started monitoring. And we'll have a midterm evaluation and a final evaluation. Next slide, please. So our status quo at the moment, I'm just citing a few measures. You can find more on the website. Some of the measures of the departments are also an internal carbon tax. Eloise mentioned from another university. 6 out of 16 departments use that, and they use the money for compensation, for internal research projects and teaching. And it's quite interesting what they came up with, how to use the money. Majority of departments, they do compensate, but we stress that this is not part of the reduction goal. It's only a preliminary measure, and we don't want to focus on the compensation. This is really preliminary and interim. Some departments have strong recommendations, like just one intercontinental conference per PhD, to use the train until between 600 and 800 kilometers, and they provide first-class train ticket as an incentive, and to combine different activities. So if you go to San Francisco, look around what other labs are there to visit. There is also a strong movement to support conferences in Europe and to have biannual conference instead of yearly. And of course, what we all try to do and what has really moved forward with Corona now is virtual conferences, and also to adapt ETH regulations. Eloise already mentioned that we have a PhD since 2 years who studies the transformation process to give us insights. How do we have to do a culture change project within our organizations, and also to provide other organizations with our lessons learned, what worked and what didn't work so well. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. For me, it's a combination of top-down support. So I think the top-down support is absolutely essential, but the decisions to travel or not to travel are made by individuals. So I think it's very important to involve all staff and students and not just the interested individuals. I think transparency is very important. And we had very open discussions, and we had a few turning points. We invited all departments to discuss their reduction targets. And there were very interesting moments where some of the departments discussed with the other departments that we should not ask if we should reduce, but how we can reduce. And also, we said that every department is free in the reduction target. I provided a list with the reduction targets and measures of all departments, and this is available to all the departments within ETH. I think a good database for monitoring is essential, and that was a strong request right at the beginning from the departments. That's why we set up a new monitoring system. And we try to change our framing. We don't want to talk so much about reduction, but we want to talk alternative to flights. And quite a few people tried out long distance train journeys to UK, to Northern Europe, and so on. And they say it didn't always work perfectly well, but for them, it was okay. It's quite often quality working time. So this is not a reduction. This is nothing which you wouldn't like to do, but this is an alternative and can also be a benefit. For us, the role of champions and influencers was very important. So individuals who move forward the idea and to do the trend setting. We do have the discussion about the conflicting targets, and there are conflicting targets in the current scientific system. So we do have the personal context. We want to have international research, corporations, and climate goals. We know it's a wicked problem. There are no simple solutions, but different and creative approaches. So we do a trial and error, but I think we have to start to do something. We are very well aware that cultural change needs endurance, but occasionally there are turning points like now with Corona, where virtual tools are suddenly tried out. And I'm very deeply convinced a common approach of many organizations is needed to be successful. Next slide, please. And with that, I would like to thank you for the opportunity.